You are listening to River West Radio on WXRWLP 104.1 FM Milwaukee. Support for this program comes from Collectivo Coffee and Troubadour Bakery, makers of artisan breads and scratch-baked goodies. Visitors to Collectivo's Bayview Cafe can look in on Troubadour Bakers as they prepare breads and cafe favorites daily. More info is at collectivocoffee.com. Do you want to support your community radio station? Here's your chance. From now until December 30th, River West Radio is participating in a nationwide fundraising effort for community broadcasters called Give Big to My Station. Your tax-deductible gift will help River West Radio continue to provide a platform for alternative and marginalized voices. Go to riverwestradio.com and click Give Big to My Station to make a one-time donation. Thanks for listening. And thank you, listeners, for listening. If you're listening live in Milwaukee, it is cold and damp, that moisture in the air. That's what can really do it. And God forbid wind strikes up. That can really make it bitter cold. And some people dress for winter, and some people literally never catch on. It's bizarre to see the pain in some people's eyes as their body goes increasingly frigid with every moment spent out there. It's bizarre. You know, you got to have good socks that are thick, that are washed, too, so there's breathability in the socks and your clothes, your jeans, and all of that stuff. I've got an Arctic jacket on. Actually, I'm wearing it in the studio right now because it is a little bit cold. Got a Packers hat on, knit hat, got gloves, good socks that were recently bestowed, actually, and I'm very thankful for those socks because it's winter and previous years the socks have gone thin. Now I do have a brigade of winter socks at the ready. And Gabe, thank you for calling in. Thank you for your patience. But no, those socks are mega appreciated because it's just at the right time. Good stuff. So yeah, if you're listening live in Milwaukee, it is night out, cold. Winter's here, snow on the ground, it's melted off to cement, but it still lays on the land. And it's a good time, obviously, for watching films and reading. And there's a number of great films out there, or interesting films of interest, from Lady Bird and The Post to The Disaster Artist, among many others. In fact, this Sunday's New York Times lists their top 10 films of the year, along with top 10 plays and so on and so forth. It's their top 10 lists that are out in the arts section. So that was nice to read. It's always a great way to start a Sunday morning, and then on Monday morning you move over to the book review. And I got an eclectic. I only get to watch a few films a week, and I kind of got an eclectic session in this week from, of all things, from When Harry Met Sally. I had never seen that before. To Carl Theodor Dreyer, My Métier, and which is a fantastic doc. You know what? I want to stay away from hyperbolic adjectives. It's a solid documentary on Carl Dreyer's essential canon, which is The Passion of Joan of Arc, Vampire, Day of Wrath, and Gertrude. I've seen those 5 films, and those are the films essentially covered, and then one prior to The Passion of Joan of Arc. And if you haven't seen The Passion of Joan of Arc, it's a silent film from the late 20s. It can be argued as one of the greatest. There's no such thing as the greatest, but so it can be among the canon of the greatest films ever made, along with Andrei Rublev, which is a fantastic film from Tarkovsky from '66, and so that it just fits right in there. Passion of Joan of Arc and Andrei Rublev, just two fantastic homages to cinema itself, undoubtedly. So, what's fun about things like, because I write and I like to be aware of dramatic form in a very pronounced way, which a Hollywood film does, and then you yourself go back and subtleize that form. Films like When Harry Met Sally, I mean, they have their historical context. The dust has settled on all that stuff. People become very excited by new offerings, as if these films were all the greatest things out there, and then with time they just, that was a good film. But the crowd always tries to incite you, you got to see that film, you got to, and this just goes on month after month, year after year, decade after decade. So now when you say something like, I saw that film, it's like they give you an odd look in the eye. Well, wasn't that like a quarter century ago? Well, time flies, so it really doesn't matter when you see films. Again, when you see films that from the prior years, you do get that historical perspective. Where were you? And look at these styles. Do these styles hold up? What were the attitudes? What was the tonality of the day? So it is interesting in that kind of object of history. And Stoker was a very innovatively conceived film, and we are very aware of ourselves now. We are very aware of the cinema that we make, and so it's not like these films are, wow, this is great. Have you seen this effect or this idea or that idea? Where now there are hundreds of films with hundreds, if not thousands of nuanced ideas. So when you see the effect of like the Volkswagen car in this kind of kaleidoscopic haze in 20th century women, it would have been a neat effect like 40 years ago, but now we are used to just this like infinite range of ideas presented on the screen. And the same with Stoker as well, is that again, these are very imaginatively brought about, but we are in the era of sporadic imagination. Again, like I said, if these films would have came out in the 60s and 70s, they would have been revelations in style, or one may have a particular effect or a whole range of effects. So to say that now, it's just kind of like flat lines, because now we're immersed in that realm. So it's not mind blowing, but Stoker's a very good film, and again, like I say, very very much worth seeing. But if you are a fan of cinema, Carl Theodore Dreyer, my métier, that's something definitely to check out. And it's the interviews too, since this is pre-digital. I think it came out in '95. That means that stunning, crisp black and white that people are interviewed in is film, and these interviews are not shot like the standard talking heads at a very standard, with a standard sense of spatiality, where the figure and the lens are at a certain distance. Here they are innovative with the positioning of the subject in front of the camera, and with the lighting, and to good effect, I may add. So anyway, I'm reading what playwrights talk about when they talk about writing, and I'm in the Marcia Norman interview, and I had read one of her plays before becoming familiar with her, Getting Out, which is an excellent play. But anyway, she had some very insightful things to say, and about the arena of writing. And in her class that she shares with Christopher Durang, another playwright, she says when a work is read, when a work is discussed, the class is not allowed to say, well, what I would do is I'd put this person here, I'd have them driving a car instead, I'd having them do this or that. The other people are not allowed to rewrite the other person's work. And I think that's a valuable thing to say, because they're only allowed to comment on what already exists and what their reaction to what already exists, without coming up with alternative versions of it. So that's very unique, where then the writer goes in knowing that a certain respect is going to be indulged to their work, and it's not going to be 10, 20 people rewriting their work on the spot, which can be very almost destructive in a sense, because it's they're just not paying homage to what this writer has presented them in the first place. So again, that was a valuable insight in this interview with Marcia Norman in what playwrights talk about when they talk about writing. So I'm very, very happy to have been given that book, and I'm very thankful for that, most certainly. And I think without further ado, we're going to bring Gabe up. So Gabe, I'm just giving you a forewarning here. I'm going to push up the fader, and then you will emerge buoyantly into our psyche. Would that be correct, sir?
Yes.
Nice.
Hey, Mark.
Hey, Gabe. And thank you for, I want to say, too, thank you for the text. I have like a list of people I have to email and text, and I just want to say thank you so much for that, and I'm going to read it and respond to it, even though now it is days later.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, no, I'm serious. I actually, it's part of my psyche, and this kind of like runs across the board with these very delayed ingestions, very delayed reactions to all this. But I really have to thank you so much, Gabe, for writing that.
Absolutely, Mark. So what Mark's referring to is, the other day, I'm glad he brought up these digital shot documentaries and these, like the difference between documentaries made up until about like 5 years ago. And there's still documentaries that are shot on film occasionally, like anything that I'm sure, any documentary that Martin Scorsese does, which he makes quite a prolific amount of music documentaries. Now, later in his years, he shot that Rolling Stone documentary, the concert film Shine a Light, back in 2006, 2007. The George Harrison 4-hour documentary, Living in the Material World, that he made for PBS, alongside with the Bob Dylan documentary, maybe the Bob Dylan documentary, and possibly the rock documentary to end all rock documentaries. It's just a stunning film. I remember watching it twice. Like I think it's 5 hours in length, and it's either 5 or like 4.5. And I watched it all the way through. It took me 2 nights, and I just remember finishing it and then immediately watching it again, just for entertainment purposes, in that it was such a stunningly well-made piece of entertainment. And the fact that it's shot on film, the fact that there's the angles are selected very carefully, there's not some sort of revolution of technique or of perspective, or there's not some like Errol Morris type infusion of avant-garde creativity, where one person's explanation of events or one person's description of one set of events are overlapped over a ironic other set of events or ironic other happening or description that has nothing to do with it. It's a very straightforward documentary, and Scorsese has this huge litany of resources that, can you imagine putting out a notice to certain film archives or institutions, Martin Scorsese looking for resources through PBS for George Harrison documentary, for Bob Dylan early years documentary. I mean, the access immediately, the doors and the amount of whether it's previously used or unused footage or materials or recordings or, just the amount of research and access allowed by those two institutions being joined right there. And not that Martin Scorsese is an institution, but the name has a certain credibility and a certain veneer and a certain principle attached to it. So, films like that, documentaries that are shot on film, I always pay attention within about 5 minutes when I take full notice, just because nowadays they're not. Most documentaries as good as they can be, are typically just shot on digital, and they're this occurred to me right after I'd sent this text to Mark. So I was recommending this new film on HBO that just came out, and so it'll be available on DVD and probably, or in a library system, and let's give it a few months. But it's called Newspaper Man, and it's about the life of Ben Bradley, the legendary newspaper editor of the Washington Post through many of the most important years that newspapers were a dominant force in culture in Western society, in any society throughout the 20th century. And Ben Bradley becoming a celebrity, an interviewee, a regular figure on talk show circuits, someone who is a public figure, a celebrity, but also a celebrated figure of culture for good reason. He was first, he became this very widely controversial and important figure in news and in journalism and in history. So Ben Bradley, and HBO does this great job of making a very historically interesting, sociologically and very psychologically astute. They make just a high quality product, whether it's their original fictional films or their documentary films. HBO's original film productions are always just of this really high order. But after a while, I've been watching just about every documentary that they've put out for quite a while now. For I'd say about a year. I think there's maybe about one or two a year that come out that I don't watch. And when there are these pieces on historical 20th century figures or filmmakers or celebrated writers of the 20th century, they begin to form this mold of exceptionally well done, artistically liberal, and sort of more creative, open-minded takes on episodes of A&E's biography. But with the incredible uses of montage, visual art, going through their works of taking things that they've created with their hands and creating sort of a visual machine art with it. And so they have an incredibly creative team at their offices that make the graphic art design in the film that sort of look like expanded credit sequences that go throughout the film, where they have these gimmicks of these ways of using words and fonts and the actual text of what they're saying as they're saying it pop up on screen, so you really so the words really sink in. It's just for dramatic effect, but it's extremely it's just one of the things you get to do when you have a higher budget of resources. The difference between a PBS documentary and an HBO documentary is significant in certain factors, that there's certain gimmicks that are repeated very often to catch your attention. There's a focus on different resources. Now, if you were to pick the subjects that are often picked for PBS documentaries or HBO documentaries, they're often the same. Literally, sometimes PBS will do a documentary, then 10 years later, HBO will do it. Very often it's the case that they both cover the same subject. The PBS documentary is very low budget usually. Is focused more on just the talking head's perspective of the person in question, of the subject, and an interviewer discussing their life's work with them, their most prominent work, and going into specific detail. Going over, usually is expanded over still photographs, black and white photographs of them over the time period being discussed. HBO usually has this more expansive palette of using the music and going, having this never before seen behind the scenes footage, all this visual stuff, looking at the notes that the person was going through, turning it into this graphic arts design thing. It looks like a video game by the time it's over. And it's just because they have, more money and more resources to play around with that stuff. But the HBO stuff is definitely, and they're just as intelligent, but the HBO stuff is definitely more candied in its visual appearance. So I'm watching this, and I'm like, does that either add to or detract from the final product? Does that cheapen Ben Bradley as a figure? Does that cheapen the film? does that add to or take away from the film? And at times, it's like a lot of that stuff does take away from the final product. The more that they're throwing at the screen, it's literally like they're throwing candy at us, and we're eating it, and either it's too sweet or it's like just all these different flavors. And I mean, eventually, it's either like we're throwing things at the screen or they're throwing things at the screen. Everyone's throwing things at the screen. And sometimes it's like, just calm. I want to just shout at the screen. I want to shout at HBO, just calm down. You know, your insistence on throwing the visual makeup of the words at me is actually cheapening the words. You're actually taking power away from the subject. You're taking the immediacy of this person's legacy and turning it into, you're turning it from fruit into like really cheap, big bottles of barefoot wine or like yellowtail wine that you can buy at the drugstore or something. Stop. So, you know, it's an incredible film. HBO does an incredible job, but you know, you watch enough of these films, of any type of film, and eventually just the patterns start to emerge, no matter how interesting the subject may be. So, you know, still highly recommended stuff. Still a very, very well done movie. Got a lot of watching done this week, you know, just stuff after work, and just managed to pile on multiple movies in some cases, some days. Newspaperman, Ben Bradley. I did finally watch the Jack Reacher sequel, which Mark had mentioned that a few months ago that he saw it. I just was bored. You know, I mean, the original Jack Reacher I've talked about on the show several times. It's an ode. It's a loving homage to the action films of the 1970s and 80s. The good action films, like the Walter Hill action films. Long tracking shots, shot on film, very little musical interruption. You know, the sound of muscle cars is the main driving soundtrack force. Long interrupted takes during the fight sequences. Actual stunt work, you know, not using fast cutting in order to give a sense of motion and timing, just having interesting stunts and interesting interplay of the actors when in terms of the fight choreography, and just the disposition and the placement of the actors and their marks on screen as they're being filmed. Jack Reacher, the sequel, has none of that. Nothing that made the original Jack Reacher film interesting is present in the sequel. Other than that, it's notable for pointing out some of the more boring aspects of contemporary action film. But as usual, Tom Cruise is enigmatic and just a joy to watch on screen. I've always been a huge fan of Tom Cruise, always will be. You know, I'm going to skip his Mummy reboot film, just out of the fact that I don't want to. I have zero need or interest or desire to watch that. And after its universally appalling reviews that came out for it, and Universal Pictures is now laughing stock proposed Greatest Monsters series that they were trying to launch as a competition to the Marvel and the DC universes. They were trying to launch their own superhero brand of films with Victor Frankenstein, which came out, I believe, last year, starring Daniel Radcliffe and James McAvoy, which I also did not see because there was no pressing interest or need to see it, despite some fair reviews. The Mummy reboot, which got universally slammed reviews, universally horrible reviews. They were also planning on doing a Wolfman movie. I know that they did a Wolfman reboot back in 2012, and I think that they were going to pull all of those back again. They were going to do a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and a Wolfman film, and now all of that is going on pause because it just seems like Universal Pictures doesn't have the money to back that up. So we may well see the beginnings of a real shrinking of the studio system in our lifetimes. What almost happened in the late 60s and early 70s with the near collapse of several film studios and the near collapse of Columbia in 1979. We've never seen anything come nearly as close. Production companies that have become minor studios, I think every minor production studio that's become a major powerhouse studio or a minor powerhouse has folded. And what I find just shocking is the fact that they don't learn from from the mistakes of their predecessors. Orion Pictures, Savoy Pictures, United Artists under MGM, which crashed and burned 3 separate times. MGM, which has nearly crashed and burned 3 times. Artisan Entertainment, which used to be live entertainment, live home entertainment, which due to the a litany of a large range of successes, both in the home video market, the made-for-cable market, and other small successes, was able to transform into probably the most influential and important independent film studio of the late 90s, releasing Blair Witch Project, among many other celebrated independent films, and they collapsed under their weight. Lionsgate is collapsing under its weight as we speak. Lionsgate's taken for granted now as being a major film studio, but it is still an independent film studio, despite the fact that it had some big boy success about 6-7 years ago, and actually acquired another minor studio, Summit Entertainment, under its wings. But that grace and that flight has now looks like it's coming to a landing, and it might even be a crash landing. And Universal Pictures and Paramount Pictures, even though they are owned by giant conglomerates and are part of these huge media networks, as is Warner Brothers and the Time Warner Network. Warner Brothers, Universal, and Paramount are all in trouble. Their films are ballooning out of control, and they are part of the larger problem in the film world, which even the studio execs are admitting, that every film needing to be this international blockbuster success, and the fact that producers are striving to make those kinds of films is the norm. That, like, you know, a lot of these films are all action films or fantasy films or these huge blockbusters that cost $200 million to make. You know, the worldwide advertising, $80 billion or something like that. You know, and the worldwide gross has increased, so a lot of these movies aren't as dependent on in fact, the U.S. market is becoming very secondary or triary to these international markets like China and Brazil and Russia. Movies like Live Free or Die Hard, which, you know, like made almost no money in the States, but were these giant international successes. And a movie that's so bafflingly inept and stupid, at least to the audience in the States, that I tried watching The Great Wall the other day, and it just almost wasn't even possible, which is a contemporary big budget international production that Universal Pictures put out, directed by Zhang Yimou, who's a very celebrated international director. He's made some great films, visual films, poetic. I mean, unabashedly, like, poetic mainstream martial arts films. And, you know, he makes this giant film with special effects and dragons and 3D and Matt Damon with long hair in the 15th century or in the 16th century. The movie is just so... it's not bad in any sense. There's no such thing as a truly just bad film or a good film. You know, there's whose account is accurate, but it's just weird. It's just a very surreal experience because this film is so clearly made for a Chinese audience more than an American audience. And when I looked at its worldwide box office figures, I mean, I think it was laughed at 2 different festivals. I think it was either last year's Academy Awards, like earlier, like this year's Academy Awards. I believe it was like lampooned, and it was like, I think there were 3 jokes made at its expense, and at another ceremony it was laughed at, and Matt Damon sitting there laughing in the audience, getting ridiculed for like what a big failure this movie is and how stupid this movie is, and you know how this movie was so widely advertised. And in reality, I looked at its advertising budget in the States. I mean, yeah, they poured probably about $25-30 million into it, and it didn't go anywhere, but worldwide, The Great Wall is like the 3rd highest grossing film of the year in the world, 2nd highest grossing. And you're talking at nearly $1 billion. And this film, yes, cost like 200 or whatever, $250 million to make, but worldwide gross, it's like pulling in close to $1 billion. Matt Damon's a producer on this movie. Matt Damon is so rich from this stupid movie that everyone's making fun of. I mean, you can make fun of The Great Wall all you want. Matt Damon has probably pulled in what, $110 million from this movie, maybe like 80 million just himself. There's nothing to laugh about with that. So yeah, this silly, stupid, bizarre film. I mean, I guess who's the loser there? But just one of those things. Like box office, especially American box office, doesn't mean anything. Movies are a monetary product. They're meant to make a profit. Some fringe independent film that was produced that has no narrative or like the artiest, most pretentious film ever made or whatever, that's still made to generate a profit in some way, shape, or form. How it does it, I'm not always sure. But a lot of movies get bought up by streaming services. So that's a go-to place now for a lot of these movies, because Netflix will pony up $1 million, $2 million for a lot of movies at film festivals, and then they just disappear into the Netflix archive. Other films that got watched: Allied, directed by Robert Zemeckis, starring Brad Pitt and I can never Cotillard, whatever her name is, the French actress Marianne Cotillard. She won Best Actress for Ma Vie en Rose a few years ago, about 10 years ago. She's a great actress, but she never quite hits her mark with me. But she's exceptionally good in that film. It's a World War II thriller and a post-World War II. It's a World War II thriller, and it had some unexpected surprises. Very mainstream film, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I always like seeing action films where Nazis just get plugged away by machine guns. It's just one of those really hypocritical. I call myself a humanitarian, but man, things like seeing Nazis just like get rattled with gunfire, it just never gets old. It Comes at Night, Brigsby Bear, and Confirmation, those all got watched too. Confirmation's an HBO original film about, I was going to say Wendell Pierce, but that's the actor that plays him. But man, it's like I'm watching Wendell Pierce play not Thurgood Marshall, his successor. I can't remember his name now. It's funny, I was just watching this movie a few hours ago, and I can't remember what it's about. But anyway, it's about this.
Well, your mind is taxed because you've got a wealth of information you're dealing with, and I just at this midpoint, I'd like to say thank you to Gabe, man, for and I'll continue here to be in the haze of your spell. Please continue.
The Anita Hill scandal in '91, which HBO made a documentary about this last year, before the sexual harassment scandal hoopla of this year. And, so it's a very timely film, and I'm glad I watched it, because it just shows how much Anita Hill did. Fresh Air ran an interview about how Anita Hill changed our perception of sexual harassment in commonplace society, which is a very interesting interview. And, we're looking back at some of these former scandals or these former accusations or these former trials of sexual harassment, and they really were not taken with the same depth as they are today. In terms of the type of celebrity scandal of people, powerful names resigning or getting stripped of their power, prestige, and just even being called out publicly, it's there's two sides to that. There's obviously the side that's all good and all well, and that people should be reckoned for their bad deeds, especially their sexual impropriety that they inflict upon other people unwillingly on the victim side. But also that eventually, we might see another side to that where there's going to be someone who's probably going to be falsely accused, and there's going to be a big hoopla about it, and then it's going to turn out to be false. And that's only reasonable. That's only fair in terms of the process of how many people are going to get accused and how many people are going to be rightfully accused. Just because people are coming out, people are finding a courage that they never had before. But on the flip side of that, there's always going to be this other side to it. It's not a witch hunt. That is the wrong word to use. Men being afraid of losing their privilege and prestige and place, their idea of their rightful place, is just exactly what the problem is there. So any fear is just like, well, what do you have to be afraid of? I love being able to rest easy and, like, I don't have to. Thinking about that, I'm like, man, I've done some really, terrible things in my life. A few things that I can think of that were like, oh man, I really wronged that person this way, or oh man, that was really morally questionable, and some of the lies I've told, or some of just bad things you do as a human being that you are in knowing control of, and you do it anyway. That line in the sand that you cross, and you just do it. But that, those are some things that I'm like, man, I don't have to worry about that. And I think about some of these guys, whether they're celebrities or whether they're just average Joes, that are maybe managers or maybe are in some positions of political power or this power. And some of these guys that have done some really, in some cases, I mean, whether you want to call it major or minor, some bad things, some really bad things, some very bad things, and some just outright awful, horrible, unspeakable things. But now we are speaking, so they're not unspeakable. But, some of these guys, I'm wondering, there's like 4 layers to the fear of, like, is this person going to come out and say something, or not worrying about it, like, no one's ever going to say anything. It's fine. I don't have to worry about that. And on the flip side of that, there's some women that I'm sure, that are, it's not as common of a case, but I'm sure, there's men and women. There's people on both sides, on all sexualities, all genders, that there's some people out there that are probably not resting easy. And I wonder about that, about some of these famous people that haven't gotten called out for their improprieties yet, that are still, like, their day is still coming, whether it actually happened or not, But, it was really sad to hear about, Kevin Spacey and all these. And people had known about those rumors for years. People had known about the Harvey Weinstein stuff for years, and it just nothing was ever done about it. So to suddenly strip him of his Producers Guild credits and all of his, his years of accolades and his associations, yes, there's a certain truth that not everybody knew, or but it just wasn't discussed in the public forum the way that it is. But it was known in Hollywood. So for the people that knew to suddenly turn on him in his circles, in his societies, it's possible that not everybody knew, but, Harvey Weinstein was associated with a certain type of extreme sleaze. So I'm not sad the guy's gone. I'm not sad the guy got taken down. But I am sad that, the producer, Harvey Weinstein, isn't going to make the films that he made anymore, because he did offer some great stuff. But, I guess you do bad things to people, and I don't feel bad for you when bad stuff comes in its wake. So it's just the way it goes. Also, It Comes at Night, which is a fantastic independent film from earlier in the year. I can't remember which listener asked me to see it, but I did finally get around to seeing it. And it is as fantastic as I'd hoped. It's directed by the same gentleman that directed Krisha, and it displays a marvelous tact with camera. It's not as experimental or as Cassavetes or as wildly theatrical as Krisha was, but man, is it a studied, thorough. It's written very much like a play, and it's executed with a firm tact and knowing. It is just a fantastic horror film hybrid. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a horror film. It's more of a psychological thriller. But the things that can be done with an extremely small cast. I mean, basically you've got 6, 7, I think you've got 8 people on screen throughout the whole film, only 5 or 6 are like main cast members. So just fantastic work there. Highly recommended. And Brigsby Bear, which was one of the big films at Sundance. Another just fantastic. That was a movie that traveled around all these film festivals earlier in the year, and it's been split. Some film critics find it undeveloped, cutesy, a little too safe on the indie film, quirky film circuit of adorableness, and all those things are very true. But it is a very visually entertaining and very well-made film, full of warmth and compassion, and it's just a uniquely engaging movie, and its characterization is very good. And it's one of those rare films where it could have used an extra hour to its running time. I think it's a brisk hour and a half, and it could have been 2 hours and 15 minutes, 2 hours and 10 minutes, and it would have been a more thorough film. You feel like, not you, I feel like there's a lot that's cut out of the film. I feel like there's a lot of characterization, perspective, character development, growth, questions, moments, links that were either cut out of the film. There just seems to be these bridges, but it's possible that there wasn't. It's possible that you just have a tight, compact screenplay. It just didn't have these larger links. But if you did, it's weird because there seems to be this development of the characters that go on through the film. So if the film wasn't trimmed down from an original larger length, that just shows an extremely astute director at hand there that's going to go on to make extremely resolute and well-made product in the future, because the focus and the precision of visual language in that film, in terms of just the dynamics of props and of motifs and of these small moments, mostly unspoken, but some of which require the way that the main character's linguistics change, and his understanding of his linguistics in terms of its effect on the people around him and his place in the world of the people around him. You have a film that shows an upper level sophistication, even if this film's story isn't quite engaging or thought-provoking enough to be a proper playground to elicit those skills. So I'm really looking forward to his next film. But for people that like funny, quirky, borderline intelligent films that are still safe for the whole family, I have to recommend Brigsby Bear. It's modern, it's contemporary, its depiction of teenagers is, it's another one of those films where it has a contemporary perspective on what real teenagers are like, and I really appreciate that. Doesn't fool itself in any way, shape, or form. So I was very impressed with that. But Mark, you had said,
my man,
that
yes. What did I say?
You were talking about this Carl Dreyer documentary.
Yeah.
Did you get this from the library?
I think I got it from the fine folks at River West Film and Video.
Okay.
And I want to thank them dearly.
Absolutely. Now, for anyone listening, Carl Dreyer, as Mark pointed out, is one of those great filmmakers of the 20th century, almost undisputed, considered one of the greatest. And his films have this certain. They just have a greatness. They have a profoundness to them. They talk about both in literal and metaphorical terms, discuss the sort of the great questions of the human perspective or the human condition. So, Mark, I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on Dreyer.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that's interesting about his chronology, it becomes increasingly austere in his sense of temporal allowance. That means that these takes become very long, very kind of like austere in the texture within the composition. It's something I could see Woody Allen kind of appreciating in as a cinema master, so on and so forth. But so anyway, yeah, he had just going back to the Passion of Joan of Arc. He's very emphatic in that, with the close-ups, with the movement of the camera that's basically unseen in silent film of that era. I mean, the only rival to that, to Dreyer's instinct in the silent era, would be like Lang, Murnau, and Eisenstein and so forth, who each in their own right were creating through the vehicle of auteurism, were creating their own significant visual imprints on the silent era. So with The Passion of Joan of Arc, and actually Vampire a few years later, it's not actually a silent film. A lot of people think it's a silent film, but it is actually sound, but there's very little of it. Again, is so visually haunting and innovative for its time period. I mean, when you have like what at the same period in the early 30s, what Universal offered, these very gothic takes on like Frankenstein and Dracula, that what you would consider the classic horror film of that era. Well, you have actually art from that era in Dreyer's Vampire. I think there's also I believe it's called The Bat from the early 30s, which is an American film, I believe, which is pretty visually innovative. You have to understand that in this era, the camera was fairly static. I mean, sound had just come in, and you couldn't. Just to record sound was a very cantankerous situation because you couldn't have any camera noise, and the cameras were very large and so forth. So to have this it's kind of like a hybrid of silent and sound with Vampire. If you haven't seen it, it is high art. Then we move on to like Day of Wrath and so forth, and Gertrude and The Word, or, and which, like I say, become increasingly austere in their depictions of stylization, where it's not as it's very beautiful work, but it's not as immediate as his earlier offerings, but they're interesting nonetheless, in just in their mere presence and how their presence is in opposition to like the more velocious sentiments of populist cinema, where it's its own work in its own right, and it's not to be compared with anything else. So that's what you would get out of Mr. Dreyer and from Denmark. How's that, Gabe?
Yes, that's excellent, Mark. I was trying to think of a way to describe Dreyer, and I realized I didn't really have anything that was precise, but that's the precision I was looking for. Thank you. To say that he has his own mark and he has his own cinema and there's his own austerity is just absolutely really accurate. There's certain filmmakers that either have or they develop a certain look to their movies. They have a certain template. They have a certain visual language. They have a mise en scène. They have a type of editing, a type of shooting, and a type of, these types of themes or these types of characterization. Films that are almost like uniquely or individually markable, or that have certain cornerstones or markers. Now, to say like you see a Tarantino film, you're going to know it's a Tarantino film, I don't know that that's necessarily true. Knowing that a Tarantino film is a Tarantino film, it's going to stick out to you. It's going to make sense. But does that always are his films instantly recognizable if you took his name off of them and put them together in a film show or a film circuit together? I don't know. That it's possible. I think comparing things like Reservoir Dogs and Death Proof, or like Django Unchained and Inglourious Bastards, like, who knows? It's possible. But Woody Allen's new style, I'm glad you brought that up, because he's got this real detached sense of space and spatiality in his films. And he also is underdressing his movies, where he doesn't decorate his films with setting. He doesn't use art direction. What I would say is that a lot of Americans would probably, like a lot of filmgoers, I know a lot of American filmgoers have problems with Woody Allen films. His films are much more well received in Europe and in or the rest of the world, but primarily Europe, because he has this real Italian and real sort of he just has this European sensibility where he's more focused on the ironic interactions of the characters' neuroses and the plot dynamics. So he makes films that are very similar to like some of the situational comedies that Italy was putting out in the 60s and 70s. But he also has his unique brand of cinema where he writes he writes sometimes 2 screenplays a year, and then he goes into production on one of them, and sometimes he makes other films, and sometimes he acts in a film once in a while. But for the most part, he just continues to work because he likes to write screenplays and he likes to direct films. And he also, he likes to play jazz in a jazz club. That
right.
Sort of, he just
clarinet, I think, on Monday evenings, I believe.
Absolutely, yeah, yep.
Yeah,
he gets to do what he likes to do, which is pretty cool.
Right, exactly. I think, let's just say he has, like, I don't know, I mean, he has around 50 films. I think I've seen about 45 of them. There's like 5 I have yet to see. So, yeah, I mean, and then you have the Holy Tetralogy, Annie Hall, Interiors, Manhattan, and Stardust Memories.
Stardust, yeah, and when Woody Allen starts to get into the art film category, which you could say starts with one film or another, but on the one hand, you could say Manhattan is the film where he really becomes a serious artist. Annie Hall is where he dabbles with art, where he really creates a new type of American film, and then Interiors is where he becomes the European where his European sensibilities really start to take hold. All of those are true. Which is the greatest of those 3? That's up to the viewer. But in Stardust Memories is a combination of sort of all 3 of those. That it's a loving homage to the European art film style of the 1960s and 70s, but also is its own unique, very strange and languid and beautiful love affair with the movies and its own take on cinema and specific filmmakers in certain specific sequences. Stardust Memories really is one of those really, really thought-provoking works of visual art where he plays with editing, he plays with angles, he really does some avant-garde stuff in there that is really I'd say to the typical Woody Allen viewer was challenging at the time because he really took a sharp turn with that movie, and it was not well received when it came out. People that were more accustomed to the Woody Allen of the last decade were taken aback by it. But over time, Stardust Memories has been driven to the accolades as one of his absolute best films, which I think is great. I think it's very deserved and very accurate praise. So, but yeah, Corridor Theodore Dreyer is one of those very philosophical, very pensive and very dark filmmakers, but also his films are full of life and full of energy, but he's very subtle, and he's also very serious about it. Like, there's this contained energy. You look at films like The Passion of Joan of Arc, as Mark pointed out, there's a lot of camera movement for a silent film, lots of things happening in the frame for a silent film, and you have these very these very alive and dexterous performances, both in terms of the spirit going on underneath the characters, the emotional acting of the vibrance of the inner life of these characters, and just the physical dexterity of what they're doing on screen is also very impassioned. So that is one of those films that's way up there in terms of the greatest films ever made. But all of his movies are really notable for different reasons. Ordette, Day of Wrath, very similar to Bergman, very skeptical, questioning, hateful of religion, and very doubtful of man's so-called best intentions or highest ideals. Definitely very ironic and very dark films about our best selves and our worst selves clashing.
Very poetic, Gabe.
Yep, very, and always with that camera of Dreyer's, man. With whatever cinematographers he was using, his films are just watching. It's very similar, like the eyes of God as depicted in The Great Gatsby. It's like Dreyer's camera is just watching. That's all it's doing. It's just watching.
At times, definitely. And I actually when you talk about Ingmar Bergman, it was great. I was at the Shorewood Library, and They got a bookshelf where they've got books for sale, and I could not believe I found this crisp edition of on Ingmar Bergman's A Project for the Theater, and it was like $1, and I just in pristine condition. I couldn't believe it, and I tell you, on these cold winter days, in the interstices of work, I have read the essays, interviews, read Scenes from a Marriage, and I'm reading Nora right now, which is an adaptation, a modification of A Doll's House, and it's fantastic because what he does is he streamlines the text, he streamlines the intentions of the characters and gets them right to their essentials. So it feels very on the nose, but it's a very delightful presence of on the nose writing, and it's really a joy to read that book, A Project for the Theater. So. Yeah, when you say Bergman, that's a pleasant way I've been spending some minutes here and there with that book. So thank you, Gabe. And as you know, we only have a few minutes left, so I would say to consolidate the brilliancy of your extemporaneous thinking, undoubtedly.
Well, I got to say that. Thank you, Mark, by the way. What was I...
I may have thrown you because I'm looking at the clock.
No.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about my favorite films of the year lately, and there's just a bunch of movies that I still have to go see.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing, like Florida Project, All the Money in the World, The Post. There's a whole bunch of films that
what, Gabe?
Looking forward to seeing.
We should talk about that next week. Why don't we do that?
Absolutely.
I know, I'm serious, my man, because I think, it's Christmas time, and that should be a robust thing to discuss are these holiday offerings. So Gabe, man, I think you hit upon a crystalline idea, man, and I appreciate that. How does that sound?
That sounds very delightful, and Mark, I look forward to it because, man, that's like my favorite time to watch mainstream films all year, like, that end of the year season. Ooh.
Heck yeah! Well, Gabe, thanks. It chills my psyche to think of a show without you. I'd be like stumbling in the dark auspices of a unforgiving universe without you, my man. So have a great night.
Mark, thanks. You too. Thanks all our listeners. We will see you again next week. Great stuff. We'll talk to you later. Bye.
Yeah, I really appreciate Gabe's presence. I really appreciate life, and I just think, man, if this dude wouldn't call in, man, I'd like to get a serious heads up about that and prepare some material, because that man was born prepared, and it is really delightful too. It's like like a fireplace, like a fireside chat, and you just sit back and enjoy the warmth of his intonations, his scholarly intonations, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate a lot of things about life, albeit their inherent challenges, but also they're just a great offer. It's great offering as well. So it's symbiotic. Everything feeds into and off everything else. So, well, eat well, exercise. That's key. We will be on at the same time next week on WXRW LP 104.1 FM Milwaukee. To hear past episodes, visit riverwestradio.com/shows and click Cinema Fireside.